if Emilia and I are playing 2-on-2 basketball, it's more my responsibility than hers to win the game because she's brand new.
Mm.
In soccer, it would be more responsibility on you to win the game and to lead me towards victory. Here's the problem. In life, it's the person who's more growth-oriented who's always going to have to shoulder more weight.
That's the challenge.
And that's the challenge.
But we fall prey to, just because we had one conversation around what our expression of our needs was, or what we need from our partner, just because we express it once does not mean that's going to happen instantly. Conscious couples, business partners, and singles committed to attracting their dream partner. Welcome to the Conscious Couples podcast, where we share our life, love story, and combined relationship expertise to help you create and consistently cultivate the most magnificent, intimate relationship possible.
Never again will you feel hopeless and alone in your intimate relationship challenges.
Having accumulated thousands of hours coaching conscious couples and individuals all over the world, as well as starting and growing a global business together, Alan and I are here to guide you in all things relationships.
Thank you again for tuning into the one place where it's not about you or me, it's about the we. Conscious couples and individuals from all over the world, welcome back to the one and only Conscious Couples podcast. Today, for episode 109, before we get into it, we want to say thank you to the Next Level Podcast Solutions team for producing this show and so many others and spreading personal growth into the world. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We appreciate you. For today's episode 109, which partner is shouldering more weight? So I have a story that I want to share that I think is very, very powerful, that will resonate deeply with everybody. Before we get into that, sweetheart, ladies first, what is your intention?
My intention for our listeners is to help them courageously, after listening to this episode, courageously express what areas in their life that they're shouldering the weight. So really zooming in on where that's happening and express what they need because of that. Whenever you're shouldering a lot of weight in the relationship, doesn't matter what area or how many different areas, there's other needs that need to be met in kind of that aftermath or the relief. And so my intention is to help our listeners in this episode really communicate where those needs are, what they need, and express that in a mutually beneficial way.
So the reason this episode came up is I was coaching someone and she was really struggling. And I asked, there was like a lot of context to this, but essentially I ended up asking, what percentage of the weight, the pressure, the responsibility are you shouldering for the bigger, better, brighter future of your family? So this person's married. They've been married for, I want to say, a decade at this stage. They have one child, and they have a household that they run together. And at one point, the male in the relationship was the breadwinner, and now that's kind of shifted, but they both have incomes. But at the end of the day, I said, okay, household, parenting, pets, breadwinning, finances, daily tasks, things like that. How much of the responsibilities for the current, present moment and the future are you shouldering? And I said, you're not going to like the answer. That's okay. What is it? She said, I think probably like 80%. And I said, how could you possibly not harbor resentment for that when you are only 50% of the relationship, but you're shouldering 80% of the weight? And I had a conversation with one of our team members. Shout out to Emilia. She's a listener of this show as well. And she said she was doing some research, or she heard this somewhere. I'm not sure the source, but it was very powerful. We did an episode on it, Next Level University on it. And it was, resentment builds whenever you feel like your partner has the freedom to do something that you don't. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if the partner has freedom to nap during the day while the other partner has to watch the kids or the pets or the dogs or work or whatever. And I thought that was really interesting. Now, if you're an emotionally mature person, you're not going to let resentment build, even though sometimes it can still build. But if you feel like someone else has permission to be a certain way or do a certain thing that you're envious of, and you feel like you're shouldering more weight than they are, and that in this case, this person is shouldering 80% of the responsibility of the pets in the household and the child. Mm-hmm. And so the other person has some permission, for lack of better phrasing, to be more lackadaisical. Or if one partner's super responsible for the finances and the other partner never has to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that happens a lot in relationships. Very rarely is a relationship, particularly an intimate relationship, 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
And so you and I, one last story here is, I told Emilia I have an event coming up, live event month, and most likely you're going to have to shoulder a little more responsibility in the meantime. But here's the downside. What if after the event is over, it just kind of defaults to that?
Mm-hmm.
So you've been taking
Levels
on a
out.
lot more of the household. You've been doing the stuff in the kitchen more. You've been taking care of the pets better. You've been really picking up and supporting me, which I really appreciate it. But if I wasn't a conscious couple, a conscious partner
Mm-hmm.
in this case, after the event is over, I might just let that ride. Unconsciously, you would build resentment, maybe not even knowing, and then you'd have to have the courage to eventually bring that up. And so that's what this episode is figure out which partner is shouldering more of the weight. And if you're on the end where you're shouldering more of the weight, maybe it's time for a courageous conversation of, I'm going to need you to do this, or this, to really start evening this out, because it's really not fair to me, and I'm feeling disrespected or resentful.
Well, what happens in a lot of relationships, to what you just said, babe, is that two people enter into a relationship, or in this case, two people, and they come with a whole different set of background, experiences, expectation, gender roles, and everything that comes with that. And let's say, for example, the male in the relationship came from a background that the man is the one that's going to provide for the household financially, right? Get the bread for the family, put it on the table. That is going to be his strength that he brings into the relationship. Now, the mother, let's say, for example, maybe she has been conditioned, and because of her gender, to really have more of a skill set and strength in child development, in child rearing. That is very common when it comes to relationships. Those gender roles coming in and things just kind of settling there. And that's where a lot of couples get things, from my perspective, and what the research that Amy Lennius, I think, was poking into, really get things tripped up. Because what ends up happening is, in that settling into what those existing gender roles are, you're not necessarily injecting growth into the relationship, which you have a beautiful word that you're going to share with our listener, or principle, that you and I, as conscious partners, are constantly doing. And it's helping the relationship that you and I have grow at a rate that we had shared a little bit before this podcast. Like, we should be proud of our relationship, because there's so many people that look up to it, and there's so many people that are constantly referring to you and I as a standard, because we're not just settling into those gender roles. We're not just settling into what our strengths are in the relationship, and we're not always just putting our expectations on top of those strengths. Quite contrary to that, you and I are consciously identifying what is the baggage that we're bringing into the relationship. What are the gender roles that we have conditioned to bring into the relationship? What are the strengths and the weaknesses of our relationship? And where those are, how can we communicate the bridge courageously to do what's best for the we, but not at the expense of the me? And that's something that you and I always have a pulse on. So what was the word, love, that you wanted to bring in for all of our listeners? Because you and I believe so deeply in it.
So one thing before we do that is, I want to make it clear that just because you, so for example, the traditional gender roles of stay-at-home mom, breadwinning male, just because those are the traditional gender roles doesn't mean you can't decide to actually do that.
Facts.
And as long as you're not just defaulting to it based on conditioning. And I want to make that clear too, because some people actually do want to do that. And it's like, no, this is actually what I want.
For sure.
So I want to make that as clear as I can, because there's a big difference between just settling into something unconsciously versus we chose and decided this because this is what we both actually want.
And a lot of couples don't actually have that conversation.
Yeah.
A conscious conversation around, okay, and that's what I wanted, but things change. And that's one of the things that couples get a lot, like, they get off in terms of, okay, maybe this was the case for the first 5 years. Let's settle into those gender roles because that's what we want. But couples oftentimes forget that things do change, and the couple will evolve, and things outside of them will force them to evolve and change. And so how often are they checking in on, is that what they continuously want? whether it's to be the breadwinner, whether that be to be the person who's
Yeah.
constantly rearing the children.
Is that because that's what you might have wanted in the beginning, but
Yeah.
maybe one partner loses a job, maybe one partner finds a passion in their career,
Yeah.
and things change and evolve. So are you evolving with it? And that
Yeah.
brings the word that you wanted me to mention, which is entropy.
Mm-hmm.
Entropy, if you look this up, is a universal principle. It's true everywhere. It's a scientific term. Everything falls back to disorder. And so there's a bunch of different examples that we can use. But in other words, if things aren't growing, they're dying.
Yeah.
Everything will decay over time or fall into disorder over time. So if you think of a building or a house that never gets renovated, you were in real estate, love. So if you have a house that wasn't taken care of,
Yeah.
that wasn't updated or renovated or improved, it will slowly decay. I think of the famous movie back in the 90s, Jumanji, and there was
I
a
love that.
house that one of the young girls, she grew into a woman, and he goes back to visit her, and the house is just completely grown in and destroyed and in
Yeah.
disarray because she was so depressed and didn't actually take care of it at
Yeah.
all. She didn't want to change anything because she got traumatized by that early event. If you've never seen Jumanji, it's a great film, but essentially what the house in that is just overgrown completely. So
It's
you
a
don't
law
want
of nature, and we are no different than nature. So
Exactly.
it will get overgrown in your relationship, and things will fall into disorder unless you're constantly weeding the garden.
Yeah, and so the idea is the system will always fall into disorder, the system in this case being the relationship, unless intentional energy is injected into it. So I used an example of, we all love Apple and Apple products, and if every Apple employee or team member just decided, you know what, I don't really want to be productive anymore, Apple would slowly eventually be nothing. And so in a relationship, it's the same idea. So in our career, we understand you have to work hard on your professional skills and on your career in order to advance.
Yeah.
But yet we think a relationship is just supposed to work without any work. And it doesn't work that way. And so this person, going back to the original 80%, 20%, she's feeling like she's taking on 80% of the responsibility for their future. I said, it's either going to stay this way or you're going to have the courage to bring it up. And she said, well, I have brought it up and things get better for a little while, but then they eventually go back to this. And I said, that's entropy. That's natural. You can't bring it up once and then expect massive transformation. That's why we do check-ins. That's why we schedule every week. That's why we do gratitudes at night. That's why we do these episodes. That's why you and I have tough, courageous conversations and give each other feedback.
Yeah.
Because, and we're always checking in with each other, I can always tell when Emilia is not fulfilled. And then my job is not to fulfill her, but it is my place and my part, my responsibility to ask the question and try to understand how I can support her. So it's Emilia's responsibility to be fulfilled and to fulfill her own needs, but it's my responsibility to understand her and try to support her in that, and vice versa. And so this responsibility thing, again, who's shouldering more of the weight? The weight is responsibility. And if you're taking on 90% of the responsibility for the relationship or the parenting or the household, you're going to crack like a walnut, or you're going to build tons of resentment and eventually explode like a volcano.
Definitely. And here's the thing. Oftentimes it's the person who has the higher awareness that often is inherently shouldering more of the weight. And that's what's fascinating about all of the systems and how the relationship systems tend to work. They tend to work, and I might go out on a limb here, and this might be politically incorrect, but they tend to work because usually the feminine in the relationship is constantly trying to inject new energy, trying to help the relationship grow, because statistically speaking, there's a lot more of passed down generational awareness, whether that be in the emotional intelligence or the vulnerability or the household knowings. Those little tiny things get passed down. And so with that higher awareness, there inherently feels or comes with a deep feeling of responsibility inherently. And there's a lot of gender studies and research stats that do back this up from a gender standpoint. Likewise, the gender standpoint that backs up the fact that a lot of men feel the pressure to provide from a financial standpoint. And so with a higher awareness may be passed down generationally from a gender standpoint of how to quote unquote provide gender stereotypically. There is an unconscious burden that comes with that, or feeling of responsibility that is also placed on males. And that's being brought in unconsciously in the relationship. So whoever has the higher awareness in a particular arena, likewise, is unconsciously bringing in that burden of responsibility and shouldering likewise more of that weight, maybe unknowingly. And so I think that the 3-step for our listeners here is understand where you might be feeling that and trust what that feeling is, because that feeling is usually a ping saying, I have higher awareness here. And this is something that just because I have a higher awareness does not mean that I want the higher degree of responsibility in this, does not mean that I don't want my partner kind of bringing in their skill sets in here and or growing their skill sets here. So number one is the courageous moment to express those needs. When you feel that ping and you're just like, I am shouldering way too much of this weight. Like you ask that client, and once she has that awareness, okay, what is she going to do about it? She told you that she's already talked about it, right? Here's where our expectations are slightly flawed from my perspective. We just think, and I fall prey to this too sometimes, so I'm no angel in this, but we fall prey to just because we had one conversation around what our expression of our needs was or what we need from our partner. Just because we express it once does not mean that's going to happen instantly. I know you and I have had conversations around that.
Hi, Amy and Chris Lennius here to give a quick moment of appreciation for Alan and Emilia. We have been working with them for a few months now, maybe 6, maybe going on 6 months now, and we appreciate you guys so much. To see you guys work as a team, to help couples work as a team is one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen. Not only have you helped us reconnect and helped us with our marriage, you've also helped us through big life moments, with boundaries, with creating our own stable unit at home. We appreciate you guys so, so much.
Yes, truly heartfelt appreciate you guys and everything you've done for us.
Thanks, guys. We love you.
Communicating what your expectations are in step number 2 is going to be extremely important so that your partner is understanding what you need and what your expectations are in that. So, for example, if I communicate with Alan, okay, awesome, I totally understand that I'm going to be shouldering more of the responsibility in the next month or so because I want to support you. You have an event. I'm super grateful because you're shouldering more of the financial burden right now for our household. And I understand that I'm going to be taking more on all of this kind of household front, babies, etc. What my
fur babies,
yep,
in this case,
fur babies.
It's important to.
We don't have babies yet.
Yeah.
What my expectation is that we are constantly checking in with one another, even if it's uncomfortable, even if we're overwhelmed. And what my expectation is, what I need in while I'm shouldering that, is us to be more proactive about how we're feeling throughout this whole thing. Because there's going to be a lot of pressure cooker that you and I are both in. And if we're not communicating those uncomfortable, courageous truths, then I know that it's going to continue for us to spiral. And that's where the garden is ripe for planting seeds of resentment. And I don't want that growing in our garden.
And the most important piece is after the event, things shift back to a more sustainable, maybe not 50-50, but maybe 60-40 the other way. And again, it's a divide and conquer. We are a team. If you're on a soccer team, you're not expecting one player to carry the entire team.
Yeah, the goalie.
Yeah,
to go
it's
out
just
and
the goalie.
shoot all the
Everyone
goals.
has their own responsibility. That's what an organization is. And the same goes for business as well. If you're at work and you have someone who's not pulling their weight, someone has to take that over, that responsibility over. So
definitely.
One more thing. So we have a couple that I was thinking of that one of them really loves adventures and variety. So she feels like she always has to plan every trip.
Right.
And the male in the relationship was just defaulting to that without even knowing it. And so that was a couple that we coach, and we said, honestly, it's important for you to support her in that and for her to bring that up of, I don't want to have to plan when we get there and how we get there and what car we're driving and where we're going. And so this whole, I call it DRI, directly responsible individual. I've brought that into our relationship. It's a business term, but I think it's really important. I use that in my business partnership with Kevin. He and his wife, Taryn, use that in their relationship. They actually have a divide and conquer sort of spreadsheet of who's responsible for what. And you and I have our own version of that. But here's the thing. it shifts and it changes. You have to recheck in on it.
Mm-hmm.
So lately you've been doing most of the kitchen stuff, and I've been really, really focused on the business.
Mm-hmm.
And you've also been pulling some more weight on the certain relationship talks events and some of our relationship talks clients as well during the event time. And so at the end of the day, the only wrong answer is not to have the courage to bring it up. And if you're listening to this show, think about this for a second. You most likely are taking more responsibility than your partner, even right now in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
What is your partner doing in this moment? Maybe they
Mhm.
are working. Maybe working is contributing to you two's future. Maybe they're not. Maybe they're playing video games. Again, I'm not villainizing people doing their passions. I love movies as much as the next person. I love R&R as well. But
Mm-hmm.
let's be honest, you're sitting here investing in learning to try to make your relationship better, and ask yourself the tough question, are they willing to put in that same level of effort? Because back to the entropy principle, all things will fall into disorder without intentional energy injected in. That's what this podcast is. We are trying to help inject intentional energy into you, listener,
Mm-hmm.
or viewer, if you're on YouTube. And that intentional energy gets injected into your relationship, and then your relationship has a bigger, better, brighter future, and it can flourish. But it's not going to flourish unless you have the courage to say, listen, we need to do the work if we want to climb this mountain together. And the only way this relationship succeeds long term, without it being just sort of this sustained surface level settling
Coast.
relationship,
Mhm.
coasting relationship, is if we recheck in on these things. So
Which is what step number 3 is, which is continue to increase the shared value of growth in your relationship. That is super, super critical, because if you both continue to increase the shared value of growth, i.e. trying to get away from entropy as much as possible, the probability of you two shifting gears between who's shouldering the weight when, not only the probability of that happening, but also the relationship of that shifting as it shift is going to be so much more productive and fulfilling and bringing goodness to your relationship, rather than contempt, resentment starting to kill and eat away at the relationship.
I want to share this, and then we got to jump, but Emilia and I, sometimes we play basketball, and we'll do running, and we'll do soccer, we'll play basketball, especially in the spring and the summer, and then we weight train together.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting because when we play soccer, Emilia naturally leads and takes more responsibility for the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
When we play basketball, I'm doing that. And so here's the problem. If now let's take that metaphor and let's go into life. If Emilia and I are playing 2-on-2 basketball, it's more my responsibility than hers to win the game because she's brand new.
Mm.
In soccer, it would be more responsibility on you to win the game and to lead me towards victory. Here's the problem. In life, it's the person who's more growth-oriented who's always going to have to shoulder more weight.
That's the challenge.
And that's the challenge. So if you're naturally growth-oriented, think about how capable you were
Mm-hmm.
10 years ago. Think about how capable you were when you were a teenager. What if you never grew from that place?
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden, you're with a partner who didn't grow and evolve. Now you feel like you have to take on all the responsibility just because you're more competent and more capable.
Yeah, and they didn't know how to value growth. So where do you begin things there?
Right. And so let's say you're a 10 out of 10 basketball player and you're on a team of 5 individuals. You feel like it's entirely on you
Mm-hmm.
to win the game. And honestly, if you have a bunch of basketball players who aren't working on passing, and they aren't working on dribbling, and they aren't working on their shooting, and they're not putting in the extra workouts, you're going to feel like your teammates are letting you down, and you're going to build resentment when you lose the championship. And I think that's how a lot of people feel in their relationship when it's like, well, listen, it's not okay that you're growing constantly and evolving and improving, but your partner isn't. And that's definitely how I felt
Mm-hmm.
in one of my past relationships, where I just had to take more and more and more and more and more responsibility for our bigger, better, brighter future.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like she was shouldering her side of the personal growth paradigm.
Right. And here's the thing, the benefit when you do this, when you actually do, you notice the feeling and you don't suppress it anymore. You actually move forward with that feeling, and you take that as a moment to be courageous in your expression. You communicate what your expectations and needs are, and you start to kind of showcase the value of growth in your relationship and increasing the shared value of that. You might not realize it, but your partner might actually be trying on their own accord behind the scenes to better support the relationship, to actually shoulder more brunt. though it might be unlikely, you never know. You never know
you
that.
not bringing it up is enabling them not to grow.
And exactly.
If you don't have the courage to bring it up, how are they? You might be enabling them staying stagnant and staying stuck, which is making you feel stuck,
exactly.
which is building resentment. So.
And on top of that, it's like they might be actually really open to learning from you. You never know. And so jumping to assumptions and conclusions without having a conversation around this, a vulnerable, courageous communication around this with your partner is unfair, I believe, to the relationship, because
Same.
it doesn't give the relationship any opportunity, or the person on the other side a chance to say, hey, this is what I am trying, and I hear you and how you feel that way. And just even offering that type of conversation, I think it would be unjust and unfair to the relationship, because from one vulnerable, courageous conversation, you and I have grown so much. And that it's always tied back to you deciding in those moments, or myself deciding in those moments, to either move forward in that fear or in that feeling, whatever it is.
Well, you had a feeling of, I'm doing therapy, he would also benefit from therapy.
Right.
I've been doing this work for so many years. You had that feeling, and you had the courage to actually bring that up.
Right.
Then I went and got a therapist.
Yeah.
Eventually.
And I was like, what are the odds?
And that transformed my whole life.
Yeah.
And our whole life. And so if you hadn't had the courage to face that fear of, I don't want him to feel like he's broken or he needs fixing.
Well, I had the responsibility of our emotional development on my shoulders.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it's like there's so much of self-awareness, EQ, all this stuff.
And you've actually communicated, sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt you, but you've communicated to me, you feel less of a burden ever since Carol came into my life as my therapist, and you feel like it's not all up to you, my emotional growth and all that, and my inner work. So,
and again, that's a great example of you like increasing your value of growth in an area that maybe you weren't conditioned to know was valuable.
Well, I mean, as you know, as a young American man, I was very encouraged to get a therapist and have a diary and to show vulnerability and to talk about my feelings and to not suffer in silence and to not never let them see you sweat. I mean, I had none of that. Right?
Of course not.
Of course not. Yeah, no, never let them see you sweat.
Oh.
Yeah. It's a whole thing. It's suffer in silence forever and never talk about it and pretend
always
that you
talk about it.
Pretend you have everything together 24/7, 365 and you've never had a fear in your life.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. That's not how humans work.
Yeah. Just for everyone's awareness, I was being sarcastic in case you couldn't sense my tone.
Yeah.
Okay, I know I said we got to go like 18 minutes ago.
It's good. It's good. I'm glad that we mentioned that last part, because sometimes people don't recognize what the benefit is or what the grass on the other side could be, and it sometimes can be really greener.
To me, the only answer is ever, I want a bigger, better, brighter future. Okay, how do we create that? Well, if I improve myself, then the relationship improves. And when the relationship improves, the future improves. And there really isn't a lot of other ways.
Yeah.
You don't
got to brainstorm about it. It's not like we all have all these answers.
There's this great quote of, you don't solve your problems, you outgrow them. Mm-hmm. And so think about the problems in high school as, I got caught with pit stains and so Sally made fun of me. And it's just, you don't solve that problem. I still have pit stains right now. I just outgrew that problem. I'm not exactly worried about what Sally thinks of me anymore. So personal growth is the answer. It's just hard because no one really is pointing to that. Yeah. And so that's always going to be the answer for your relationship as well. Okay. So speaking of personal growth, if you feel like you or your partner are struggling to grow together, that's what Relationship Talks coaching was born for. What are you going to get? You're going to get calls with us where we are helping you grow together, not apart. Most importantly, you're going to be more successful in your careers and your relationship. And you'll have the certainty and security that you need to go flourish in your career, because you don't have to constantly worry, are we having check-ins? Are we actually talking to each other about what's real? Are we brushing things under the rug? Are we de-weeding the garden? Mm-hmm. Relationship Talks coaching is an easy way to make sure that you're doing the inner work with each other individually and collectively to make sure you're constantly weeding the garden. Because if you're not, trust us, we're going to bring it up, because we're going to recognize where you two are not connected or might be growing apart.
So in this episode, we had mentioned one of the biggest relationship killers. If you did pick it up, if you hadn't re-listened to the episode, And Alan and I are going to be doing a free live virtual event, as we do every single month, around the 4 biggest relationship killers. So see
One of which being resentment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, see if you could pick it up, but you just gave away the answer.
I'm sorry, love.
It's all good. You can still, re-listen.
I ruined the treasure hunt.
The scavenger hunt. So we would love for you to join us in that, and all of the other conscious couples and singles that will be joining us. It will be a phenomenal event, and we can't wait to have you there. You do not have to have your mic or camera on. You can literally just join us from your cozies at home or on the drive home from work, whatever is your preference. This will be Relationship Talks number 33, and it's going to be at 6 p.m. on March 21st. Be there or be square.
And if you have not yet seen the 2006 movie, The Breakup, with Vince Vaughn and Jennifer Aniston, that is what we are building this Relationship Talks virtual event around. So if you are a diehard Conscious Couples fan and you want to do your research ahead of time,
Watch the movie.
it's funny. It's also
Brutal.
cringeworthy
It's so
in some of
cringy.
the toxic stuff. But that's the point, is they do all 4 relationship killers right at the beginning. So
We're not going to
do
give
your
away
research.
What
We
those
won't give them away. You thought I might.
are.
We're not going to give them away, but please do your research. See if you can come up with them, and then we will reveal them in the event as well. So
The
it's going to be
link
great.
to register is going to be in the show notes. Click that before you forget.
As always, thank you for listening. We appreciate you so much. And until then, it's not about you or me. It's about
The we.
The we. We'll talk to you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Conscious Couples podcast. We love connecting with the Conscious Couples community, so please make sure you follow us on Instagram. I am at Evolve with Emilia, and Alan is Lazaros88.
Also, if you or your partner resonated with this episode, leave us a review at the link in the show notes, and please share this with someone you love and care about.
Until next time, remember, it's not about you or me. It's about
The we.